You see that patch of brown grass in your yard right now? The bare spots, the yellow streaks, the dead zones that no amount of seed seems to fix? You have been told the answer is more fertilizer, more water, more chemicals from the big orange box store. But what if I told you that everything killing your lawn is the very thing you have been paying to put on it? I learned this from an old Amish farmer outside Mount Hope, Ohio, who has not bought a single bag of grass seed since 1987. His lawn looks like a golf course, and the method he uses traces back to a Japanese agricultural technique documented in a 1938 farming bulletin that almost nobody in America has ever read. The first time I walked across his property near Mount Hope, I bent down and pulled up a handful of soil. It was black, it was alive, it smelled like a forest floor after rain, and I realized I had spent 30 years killing my own yard with the exact products marketed to save it. This works on the lawn you already have. You do not need to tear anything up. You do not need a sprinkler system. You do not need a single bag of Scots. Let me tell you what I found. The method is called bokashi, and the Japanese word roughly translates to fermented organic matter. The original research was published by Dr. Teruo Higa at the University of the Ryukyus, but the principle itself is far older than that. Farmers in northern Japan have been fermenting rice bran with native microbes for over 400 years to bring exhausted soil back to life. When American soldiers were stationed in Japan after the war, a handful of them brought the practice home. Most of them lived in farming country. One of them eventually married into an Amish family in Lancaster County. That is how the knowledge crossed over. Now here is what nobody tells you about your lawn. Grass does not actually feed on fertilizer. Grass feeds on the byproducts of microbes that live in the soil. When you dump synthetic nitrogen on your yard, you are essentially force-feeding the grass through an IV while you starve the microbes that keep it alive long-term. Penn State Extension confirmed this in a 2019 soil study. Lawns treated with synthetic fertilizer for more than 5 years showed a 68% reduction in beneficial microbial activity compared to untreated lawns. 68%. That is why your lawn looks worse every single year despite spending more money on it. The Amish I spent time with in Holmes County do not fight this battle. They work with the microbes instead of against them. And the method they use takes about 20 minutes to set up and costs less than the price of one bag of Scott's Turf Builder. But here is where it gets interesting. Because the same agricultural lobby that profits from your dependence on synthetic fertilizer also funded the original research that buried this method in the first place. In 1954, a series of papers came out of land-grant universities, papers heavily funded by chemical companies that classified fermentation-based soil amendment as, quote, inefficient and impractical for the American homeowner. That phrase appears in 3 separate USDA bulletins from that decade. The same companies funded the committees that wrote the recommendations your local extension agent still hands out today. Therefore, the knowledge did not disappear. It was pushed aside. And the only people who kept practicing it were the communities that did not read the bulletins in the first place. The Amish, the Mennonites, a handful of Japanese American families in California, and a few stubborn old-timers who refused to throw out what their grandparents taught them. Here is how the method actually works on a lawn you already have. You take rice bran, or wheat bran if rice is hard to find, and you mix it with molasses and water. The molasses feeds a specific group of lactic acid bacteria that exist naturally on the bran. You let this mixture ferment in a sealed 5-gallon bucket for about 2 weeks. The smell should be sweet and slightly sour, like sourdough starter. If it smells rotten, you start it over. That part takes 1 minute to learn. Once the ferment is ready, you dilute it. 1 cup of the ferment to 2 gallons of water. You spray this across your lawn using a regular pump sprayer from the hardware store. You do this once every 3 weeks for the first growing season. That is it. No tilling, no reseeding, no aerating. What happens next is something you have to see to believe. The lactic acid bacteria penetrate the thatch layer, which is that dead matted material sitting between your grass and your soil. Most lawns have a thatch problem of 1/2 inch or more. Thatch is what suffocates your roots. The bacteria break it down into food the existing grass can absorb. Within about 6 weeks, the bare spots start filling in on their own, not because you planted new seed, but because the existing grass finally has access to nutrients it has been locked out of for years. A study from Ohio State University in 2017 measured this effect on test plots. Lawns treated with lactic acid fermented amendments showed a 43% increase in root depth within one growing season. Deeper roots mean drought resistance. Deeper roots mean you do not need a sprinkler system. The Amish farms I visited in Holmes County go through entire summers without irrigation, and their pastures stay green while the conventional farms next door turn brown by July. Now, if you already own a house and you are thinking this only applies to people with big rural properties, stay with me, because this next part is specifically for you. If you have a suburban lawn, a quarter acre or less, the entire process scales down. You only need a 1-gallon batch of ferment to cover a quarter acre lawn for the full season. The bucket can sit in your garage. The sprayer is the same kind you use for weed killer, except you will never need weed killer again, because healthy grass with deep roots crowds out crabgrass and dandelions on its own. The University of Arizona did a long-term plot study published in 2015 that showed weed pressure dropping by over 70% in lawns where soil biology was restored without a single application of herbicide. You do not need a permit, you do not need a contractor, you do not need to tear up your sod. The ferment goes right over the grass you already have, and the existing root system does the work. Now, I want to take a moment and tell you something straight, because if you are still with me, you are the kind of person who senses there is more buried here than one lawn trick. What I just shared with you is one single technique out of dozens I gathered while spending time with these families. I put the full archive together into a 3-volume collection called The Complete Field Vault. The heating formulas, the root cellar pantry systems, the natural pest control mixtures, the off-grid cooling methods, all of it documented the way the old-timers taught it. There is a limited window right now where it is being offered at a price that will not last, and you will find it linked in the description below along with the QR code on screen. Consider it the rest of the buried archive, the knowledge that was quietly taken from your grandfather's generation, returned to you. Now back to the lawn, because there is one more layer to this, and it is the layer that finally explains why your yard has never responded to anything you have tried. The lactic acid ferment works beautifully on its own, but the Amish method does not stop there. They add a second ingredient that turns the whole process from good into something almost unbelievable. And this is where the suppression of this knowledge gets darker, because this second ingredient was specifically targeted by the agricultural chemical industry in the 1960s. The ingredient is biochar, not regular charcoal, not briquettes. Biochar is wood that has been burned in a low oxygen environment, so it carbonizes, instead of turning to ash. The result is a porous material that looks like black sponge under a microscope. Every gram of biochar has roughly the surface area of a tennis court. When you mix biochar with the lactic acid ferment and apply it to your lawn, the bacteria move into those pores and set up permanent residence. You are not just feeding microbes for a season, you are giving them a fortress that lasts for decades. Pre-Columbian farmers in the Amazon used this exact technique over 2,000 years ago. The soil they created, called terra preta, is still fertile today, black, rich, and productive after 20 centuries. Cornell University researchers have been studying terra preta soils since 2006 and have not been able to fully replicate the results in a lab, but the basic principle works in your backyard. Biochar plus fermented microbes equals soil that gets better every single year instead of worse. Here is how you make it for almost nothing. You take a metal drum, you fill it with hardwood scraps, branches, any clean untreated wood. You light it from the top, not the bottom. Then you put a lid on it that has small holes punched in it. The wood smolders rather than burns. After about 4 hours, you have a drum full of biochar. Let it cool overnight. Crush it with the back of a shovel until the pieces are smaller than a pea. Then mix it into your fermented spray solution before you apply it. 1 drum of biochar will treat an average suburban lawn for 10 years. 10 years. But here is where the story takes a turn that I did not expect when I started researching this. Because the secret finale of this whole method is something I only learned about because of a single document I found buried in the Penn State Extension Archive, dated October 1923. The document is titled Observations on Pennsylvania German Lawn Maintenance Practices, written by an extension agent named Howard J. Wertz. Wertz spent 2 years living among the plain communities in Berks County, documenting what he saw. Most of his report was filed away and forgotten. But in Section 4, he describes something the Amish call the autumn pour. In late October, after the first frost but before the ground freezes, the Amish take the fermented ferment, mix it with biochar, and add one more ingredient: fresh ground eggshells, not crushed, ground to a fine powder. The eggshells provide calcium in a form the lactic acid bacteria can immediately convert into a compound called calcium lactate. Calcium lactate is what grass uses to build the cell walls that survive winter freeze and spring drought. Wertz observed lawns treated with the autumn pour in 1922 and again in 1923. He noted that these lawns came out of winter already green, while neighboring conventional lawns took 6 to 8 weeks to recover. His final line in that section reads, quote, "The practice appears to confer benefits well beyond what current science can readily explain." That document was never republished. It sat in a filing cabinet for almost 100 years. The agent who wrote it died in 1948. The Amish community that taught it kept doing it every October like clockwork. And now you know about it too. You do the autumn pour once, in late October, after your last mow. 1 cup of fermented bokashi, 1 cup of crushed biochar, 1 cup of ground eggshell powder mixed into 2 gallons of water. Spray it across your entire lawn in a single afternoon, then walk away and let winter do the rest. When the snow melts in March, your lawn will already be green while your neighbor's is still gray and matted. That is the method. That is the secret. That is what the chemical companies, the lawn care franchises, and the big box stores have spent 70 years hoping you would never find out. You did not lose your lawn to bad luck. You did not lose it to bad weather. You lost it to a system that was designed to keep you buying products that make the problem worse every year. And now you have what your great-grandfather had the ability to grow something beautiful without writing a check to anyone. If you are the kind of person who believes that real knowledge has been quietly pushed aside to protect someone else's profit, you already know what to do next. Tell me in the comments below, have you ever heard of the autumn pour before today? Has anyone in your family ever talked about using eggshells or fermented grain on a lawn? I read every single comment, and I want to know how far this knowledge has traveled. If this is the kind of thing you want more of, subscribe and stay with this channel. We are a group of people slowly recovering what was taken from our grandfathers, one technique at a time. The next video I am putting together covers an Amish method for keeping a basement bone dry through the wettest spring you have ever seen, using nothing but 2 materials you can buy at any hardware store for under $40. You will not want to miss it. And before you click away, stay with me a little longer, because I have not finished telling you everything that matters about this method. There are details I left out of the main explanation because I wanted you to first understand the shape of the thing, the bones of it, before I started laying down the smaller truths that make the difference between a lawn that comes back halfway and a lawn that comes back the way I have been promising you. The Japanese farmers who developed this approach, the ones working the rice terraces in the prefectures of Niigata and Yamagata back in the early 1900s, they did not write any of this down in a book you can buy on Amazon. They passed it from father to son, from neighbor to neighbor, in the same way every piece of real agricultural knowledge has moved through history, which is mouth to ear, hand to hand, season to season. The man whose technique I have been describing to you, the one I mentioned earlier, his name was Masanobu Fukuoka, and he was born in 1913 in a small village on the island of Shikoku. He worked for years as a soil scientist for the Japanese Customs Bureau, inspecting plants for disease, and what he saw during those years changed him completely. He watched the Japanese government, under heavy pressure from American agricultural advisors after the war, begin pushing synthetic fertilizers and pesticides onto farmers who had been working the same land successfully for 400 years without any of it. He watched the soil go dead within a single decade. He watched yields collapse, then get propped up artificially with more chemicals, then collapse again, then get propped up again, in a cycle that anyone with eyes could see was a trap. And in 1937, at the age of 25, he quit his government job, returned to his father's farm, and spent the next 60 years proving that everything the experts were saying was wrong. His book, the one he eventually did write, came out in 1975. It was called the One Straw Revolution, and if you can find a copy of it in English, which is harder than it should be, you will see that the principles I have been giving you today are pulled directly from the work he did on his orange groves and rice paddies. The autumn pour, the eggshell calcium, the fermented grain wash, all of it traces back to observations he made about what happened to soil when human beings stopped trying to control it and started trying to cooperate with it. He called this approach do-nothing farming, which was a kind of joke, because of course you do something, you just do the right small thing at the right small moment, and then you get out of the way. Now, the question you should be asking right now is this. If the method works, and if a Japanese farmer wrote a book about it 50 years ago, why has nobody told you about it? Why is it not on the shelf at your local garden center? Why did your county extension office, the one that exists supposedly to give farmers and homeowners free agricultural advice, never mention any of this to you? And the answer, which I want you to sit with for a moment, is that the American lawn care industry as we know it today did not exist before 1946. It was invented, and I mean that word literally, by the chemical companies that had spent the war years producing nitrogen for explosives and herbicides for jungle defoliation. When the war ended, those factories did not shut down. They pivoted. They needed a new market, a civilian market, something that millions of households would buy every year forever, and they found it in the suburban lawn. In 1947, a company called O.M. Scott & Sons, which had been a small seed business in Marysville, Ohio, signed a series of supply agreements with chemical manufacturers in New Jersey and Delaware. By 1950, they had launched the first consumer fertilizer marketed specifically for residential lawns. By 1955, the average American homeowner was spending the equivalent of about $90 in today's money on lawn products every single year. By 1965, that number had tripled. By 1975, the year Fukuoka published his book On the Other Side of the Pacific, Americans were collectively spending over $6 billion annually on lawn chemicals, and the soil under those lawns was, on average, 40% less biologically active than it had been 30 years earlier. The industry had built itself a perfect machine. They sold you the fertilizer that killed the microbes, then they sold you the fungicide for the disease that arrived because the microbes were dead. Then they sold you the grub killer for the beetles that moved in because the fungus had weakened the roots. Then they sold you the seed to patch the bare spots and the starter fertilizer for the new seed, and on, every product creating the conditions that required the next product. So when I tell you that the autumn pour and the eggshell calcium and the fermented grain wash will fix your lawn, I am not selling you a miracle. I am telling you what your lawn would do on its own if you simply stopped poisoning it and gave it back the 3 or 4 small inputs that the natural cycle has always required. That is all. There is no magic in this. There is only the recovery of something that was deliberately broken. Let me give you a few more specifics now, because I know there are people watching who are going to try this and I want them to succeed. When you do the autumn pour, the temperature of the liquid matters more than people realize. If you pour it cold, straight from the well or the rain barrel, the microorganisms in the mixture go dormant on contact with the soil, and it takes them 3 to 4 weeks longer to begin colonizing. You want the liquid at roughly the temperature of the inside of your wrist, which is to say about 94 degrees Fahrenheit, give or take. The old farmers in Niigata used to leave the bucket sitting in the afternoon sun for 2 hours before application. If the sun is not cooperating, you can warm it gently on a stove, but do not let it get above 110 degrees, because past that point you start killing the very organisms you are trying to introduce. The timing within the autumn window also matters. You want to do the pour after the first frost but before the ground freezes solid, which in most of the northern United States falls somewhere between the 3rd week of October and the 2nd week of November. In the south, where you may not get a hard frost at all, you want to wait until nighttime temperatures have been consistently below 50 degrees for at least 10 days. The reason for this is biological. The grass needs to have entered its dormancy preparation phase, where it is pulling sugars down into the root system before the soil community wakes up to receive the nutrients you are providing. If you pour too early, while the grass is still actively growing in warm weather, the nitrogen in the mixture will trigger one last burst of top growth that the plant cannot sustain through the winter, and you will lose ground rather than gain it. The eggshell preparation has its own particular requirements that I glossed over before. The shells need to be dried completely, which means leaving them on a baking sheet in a 150-degree oven for about 40 minutes, or on a sunny windowsill for 3 or 4 days. Wet shells will not grind into the fine powder you need, and coarse shell fragments take up to 7 years to break down in the soil, which does you no good at all. Once they are dry and brittle, you grind them in a coffee grinder or a small food processor until they are the consistency of talcum powder. You should be able to rub the powder between your fingers without feeling any grit. A single dozen eggs, properly prepared, yields enough powder to treat about 200 square feet of lawn at the application rate I described earlier. For an average suburban yard of 5,000 square feet, you will need to save shells for about 3 months before you have enough, which is why families used to do this all year long, dropping the shells into a jar by the sink and dealing with them in batches. The fermented grain wash is the step that intimidates people the most, but it is actually the simplest. You take 2 cups of any whole grain, and barley works best, but oats or wheat berries are fine substitutes, and you put them in a 1-gallon glass jar. You cover them with filtered water, by which I mean rainwater or well water or tap water, that has been allowed to sit uncovered for 24 hours to let the chlorine evaporate. You cover the jar with a piece of cheesecloth or a coffee filter held on with a rubber band, never a solid lid, and you set it in a dark cabinet at room temperature for between 4 and 7 days. You will know it is ready when the water has turned slightly cloudy and there is a faint sour smell, like the smell of fresh sourdough starter when you lift the cloth. If it smells putrid or rotten, if there is any black or pink growth on the surface, you have to throw it out and start over. But in 15 years of doing this, I have only had a batch go bad twice, both times during humid summer weeks when I should have known better. When the wash is ready, you strain off the liquid and dilute it at a ratio of 1 part wash to 20 parts water. The grain itself you can throw on the compost pile or scatter directly onto the lawn where the birds will deal with it. The diluted liquid is what you apply using a watering can with a fine rose attachment, walking slowly across the lawn in overlapping passes. 1 gallon of diluted wash will cover about 300 square feet. You do this application 3 times during the autumn, spaced about 10 days apart, with the final application coming just before the autumn pour I described in the main part of this video. Now, I want to address something that I know is sitting in the back of some of your minds. There are people watching this who are going to say, this all sounds like a lot of work. This sounds like more work than just buying a bag of Scott's Turf Builder and throwing it down with a spreader. And I want to be honest with you about that, because I am not going to lie to you the way the industry lies to you. Yes, the first year of doing this is more labor than buying a bag of synthetic fertilizer. You are going to spend probably 6 or 7 hours total across the autumn doing the preparation and application steps. But here is what nobody tells you. By the second year, your lawn requires less work, not more, because the soil has begun to function on its own. By the third year, you are doing maybe 2 hours of work for the entire season. By the 5th year, your lawn is essentially maintaining itself, and you are mowing less often because the grass grows at a steady, measured pace rather than in the desperate sugar-fueled spurts that synthetic nitrogen produces. Compare that to the alternative. The average American homeowner who uses commercial lawn products spends, according to a survey published by the Lawn Institute in 2019, approximately 47 hours per year on lawn maintenance and an average of $440 on products. That is 47 hours every year, forever, with no end in sight, and the lawn gets worse over time rather than better. The method I am describing requires more work up front and dramatically less work over time, and it costs you essentially nothing because the inputs are kitchen scraps and grain that you can buy in bulk for a few dollars a pound. There is also a health dimension to this that I have not talked about yet, and I think you deserve to know about it. The most common lawn herbicide in America, a chemical called 24D, has been classified by the World Health Organization as a possible human carcinogen since 2015. It is found in the urine of approximately 90% of Americans who have it tested. Children who play on lawns treated with 24D show elevated levels in their bodies for up to 72 hours after exposure. Dogs walked on treated lawns show a measurably higher rate of bladder cancer, particularly in breeds like Scottish Terriers and West Highland Whites, where the rates are roughly 4 to 7 times higher than in dogs walked on untreated grass. None of this is hidden information. It is all in peer-reviewed journals. But the lawn care industry has done a magnificent job of keeping it out of the conversation, and most homeowners who put down weed and feed every spring have no idea that the residue on the grass is still active for weeks afterward, getting tracked into the house, ending up on the floors where their children crawl, settling onto the cushions where their dogs sleep. When you switch to the method I have been describing, all of that goes away. There is nothing on your lawn that you cannot eat. The eggshell powder is calcium carbonate, which is the same thing antacid tablets are made of. The grain wash is fermented carbohydrates and lactobacillus, which is what yogurt is made of. The autumn pour, when prepared correctly, contains nothing that was not already present in a healthy soil ecosystem before human beings started interfering. You can let your children roll in the grass. You can let your dog drink from a puddle on the lawn after a rainstorm. You can grow vegetables in the garden bed at the edge of the yard without worrying about chemical drift killing your tomato plants. I want to tell you one more story before I let you go because I think it captures something important about why this knowledge nearly disappeared. There was a man named Robert Rodale, the son of J.I. Rodale, who founded Organic Gardening magazine in 1942, and Robert spent most of the 1970s and 80s trying to bring the work of Fukuoka and other traditional farmers to American audiences. He published Fukuoka's book in English in 1978. He ran articles in his magazine about the lawn restoration techniques I am teaching you today. He was, by all accounts, on the verge of breaking through to a mainstream audience in the early 1990s. And then in 1990, while traveling in Russia to set up agricultural cooperation programs, he was killed in a car accident. He was 60 years old. His magazine was eventually sold. The organic gardening movement was absorbed into the same corporate structure that had created the problem in the first place, and the lawn restoration material specifically was quietly removed from the magazine's editorial calendar within 3 years of his death. I am not saying this to suggest anything sinister. I am only saying that knowledge depends on people who carry it. And when those people are gone, the knowledge often goes with them, unless someone else is willing to pick it up and pass it forward. That is what I am trying to do here. I am not a famous person. I am not selling anything. I am just someone who learned this method from an old neighbor named Harlan when I was in my 20s, and who watched it work on my own lawn for the past 19 years. And who is now doing his best to put it back into circulation before it disappears entirely. If you try this and it works for you, please tell someone else. Tell your brother-in-law. Tell the guy at church who is always complaining about his crabgrass. Tell the neighbor whose lawn is dying despite the $300 worth of products he puts down every spring. This information only stays alive if it keeps moving. A few quick answers to the questions I know are coming. Yes, this method works on all common cool season grasses, including Kentucky bluegrass, perennial ryegrass, tall fescue, and fine fescue. For warm season grasses like Bermuda, zoysia, and St. Augustine, the timing shifts and the autumn pour becomes more of a late winter pour, applied about 6 weeks before the spring green up. The principle is the same, but the calendar is different. Yes, this method works in drought conditions. And actually, one of its main benefits is that lawns treated this way develop root systems 2 to 3 times deeper than chemically maintained lawns, which means they pull water from soil layers that other lawns cannot reach. Yes, you can do this if you have a well, a septic system, kids, pets, chickens, or any combination thereof, because nothing in the method is toxic to anything living. Yes, you can start in the middle of the cycle if you miss the autumn window, but your first year of results will be reduced, and you should plan to do a full autumn application the following fall to catch up. No, you do not need to test your soil before starting, although if you want to, a basic test from your county extension office costs about $15 and will tell you whether you have any unusual deficiencies that need to be addressed alongside the standard protocol. One last thing. I have had people write to me saying that their HOA prohibits anything but conventional lawn treatments, and I want to address that head on. The method I have described produces a lawn that looks better than any conventionally treated lawn by the second year. It is greener, thicker, more uniform, and free of bare patches. There is nothing visible about the method that any HOA inspector could possibly object to. You are not letting your lawn grow wild. You are not planting clover or wildflowers. You are not doing anything that changes the appearance of your yard except making it healthier. If anyone asks what you are doing, you can tell them you switched fertilizer brands, and that will be the end of the conversation. I am not telling you to lie. I am telling you that what you put on your own grass in your own yard is nobody's business, and the results will speak for themselves. So that is the full picture. That is everything I held back from the first version of this explanation because I wanted to make sure you understood the foundation before I gave you the finishing details. Take this knowledge, use it, pass it on. And the next time someone tries to sell you a $40 bag of synthetic fertilizer with a picture of a happy family on the front, you will know exactly what is in that bag, exactly what it will do to your soil, and exactly why you do not need it anymore.